What appears at first glance to be a dispute over a bridge between two friendly nations is in truth a constitutional moment. It is a moment that forces us to confront how executive power is exercised, how international agreements are honored, and how economic leverage can be wielded in ways that test the structural boundaries of our constitutional order. When a sitting president publicly threatens to block the opening of a major international infrastructure project, one negotiated, permitted, and funded under established legal frameworks, we are no longer dealing merely with trade policy. We are confronting questions about separation of powers, federalism, and the stability of lawful commitments made in the name of the United States. You have heard the facts. The Gordie Howe International Bridge connecting Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit, Michigan, was financed almost entirely by Canada under a 2012 agreement with the state of Michigan. That agreement provided that Canada would front the construction costs in exchange for toll revenue until its investment was recouped, after which Michigan would receive half of the net toll proceeds. The United States Department of State issued the required presidential permit in 2013. In subsequent years, federal funding was appropriated for customs facilities. The project proceeded through regulatory review, litigation challenges, and bipartisan political scrutiny. It survived them all. Years later, after construction was substantially complete, the president suggested publicly that he might attempt to block the bridge's opening, asserting that the United States should be compensated before allowing it to proceed. The stated rationale intertwined trade grievances with assertions about ownership and leverage. The suggestion alone reverberated across financial markets, state governments, and cross-border industries that rely upon the Detroit-Windsor corridor for a substantial portion of North American commerce. To understand why this moment matters constitutionally, we must begin with first principles. The Constitution vests in Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. It entrusts the President with the authority to conduct foreign relations, to negotiate agreements, and to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. It reserves to the states certain sovereign capacities, including the ability, within federal constraints, to enter into cooperative arrangements that advance legitimate state interests. And it establishes that once the political branches have lawfully authorized an international undertaking, that authorization is not lightly set aside by unilateral executive pronouncement. International bridges are not abstractions. They exist at the intersection of federal authority and state interest. They require federal permits because they implicate foreign relations and national security. They are often negotiated in partnership with state governments because they directly affect local economies and infrastructure. This arrangement reflects our federal design. It is neither accidental nor informal. It is structured. Historically, the United States has understood that reliability in honoring infrastructure commitments is a component of national credibility. From canal compacts in the early republic to modern trade corridors, continuity of obligation has been a hallmark of constitutional governance. Even during periods of intense political disagreement, administrations have generally refrained from disrupting long-settled projects absent clear statutory grounds or national emergency. The question raised by the recent threat is therefore not whether trade disputes exist. They always have. The question is whether an executive, dissatisfied with separate trade matters, may transform a completed and lawfully authorized infrastructure project into a bargaining instrument after the fact. That question implicates the Take Care Clause, the Commerce Clause, and the settled understanding that executive power must operate within the boundaries established by law rather than impulse. You should be clear about what is at stake. Nearly a quarter of trade between the United States and Canada moves through the Detroit-Windsor region. Automotive supply chains cross that border repeatedly during the assembly of a single vehicle. Agricultural goods, energy products, and manufactured components depend on predictable transit. The bridge was designed to provide redundancy to a corridor long reliant on a single privately owned crossing. Redundancy in critical infrastructure is not a luxury. It is resilience. When a president publicly contemplates blocking such a project, the signal sent is not confined to one span of steel. It reverberates through the architecture of intergovernmental trust. If agreements negotiated openly, permitted lawfully, and relied upon economically can be reopened by political threat untethered to new legislation, then the stability of all such arrangements becomes uncertain. In moments like this, it is tempting to view the controversy through partisan lenses. I urge you not to. The constitutional question transcends party. It concerns whether executive power remains bounded by prior commitments and statutory frameworks, or whether it may be wielded retrospectively as leverage in unrelated disputes. That distinction is foundational to the rule of law. The framers designed a system in which ambition would counteract ambition, in which state interests, congressional authority, and executive responsibility would check one another. When tension arises among those elements, the answer is not rhetorical escalation, but institutional fidelity. The durability of our republic depends upon it. In this instance, the relevant institutional framework had already been constructed long before any recent trade friction emerged. The State Department's issuance of a presidential permit was not ceremonial. It represented an exercise of delegated executive authority, grounded in statute and long practice, confirming that the crossing served the national interest. Congress, by appropriating funds for customs infrastructure connected to the project, participated directly in its implementation. Michigan, acting within its sovereign capacity, entered into a binding agreement with Canada that allocated ownership and toll revenue according to negotiated terms. These were not informal understandings. They were official acts taken through constitutionally recognized channels. When those channels have been used, and when reliance interests have crystallized around them, the President's constitutional duty is not to revisit the wisdom of the arrangement absent lawful cause, but to faithfully execute the framework that already exists. The Take Care Clause is not a suggestion. It is a command that executive discretion operate within the boundaries of enacted law and established commitment. The Constitution does not contemplate a system in which duly authorized projects may be suspended or nullified by social media declaration or shifting policy preference unaccompanied by statutory authority. It is important to distinguish between prospective policy change and retroactive disruption. An administration may seek new trade terms. It may propose legislation. It may renegotiate agreements within lawful bounds. What it may not do, consistent with constitutional structure, is convert settled legal commitments into ad hoc bargaining instruments without engaging the very institutions that authorize them. To do so is to blur the line between executive negotiation and executive negation. History offers cautionary lessons. Periods in which executive authority expanded beyond statutory constraint have rarely begun with dramatic constitutional confrontation. More often, they have begun with the normalization of smaller departures from established process. A permit reconsidered without formal review. An agreement reframed without legislative participation. A reliance interest discounted because political circumstances have changed. Over time, such departures accumulate. The separation of powers erodes not only through open defiance, but through incremental habituation. The bridge in question also illuminates the delicate balance of federalism. Michigan's participation was not incidental. The state secured a joint ownership stake without expending construction funds, relying upon Canada's financing model and anticipated toll revenue. Businesses, labor unions, and local governments structured expectations around that arrangement. If the federal executive were to interpose unilateral obstruction after the state had acted in reliance upon federal authorization, the equilibrium between state initiative and federal oversight would be destabilized. States must be able to trust that federal permissions, once granted and relied upon, will not be withdrawn absent clear legal justification. Equally significant is the international dimension. Canada financed the project under a written agreement and in reliance upon formal federal approval. International commerce depends upon predictability. The Constitution vests foreign affairs authority in the national government precisely so that external partners may deal with a single sovereign voice. If that voice signals that even completed and lawfully authorized infrastructure may become contingent upon unrelated political grievances, then the credibility of the United States as a dependable partner is called into question. That consequence is not rhetorical. It carries financial and strategic implications. None of this is to deny that trade tensions exist or that executives possess tools to address them. Tariffs, negotiations, and diplomatic engagement are part of the constitutional design. But those tools operate within legal boundaries. They do not nullify pre-existing obligations simply because they offer leverage. The constitutional system presumes continuity. It presumes that agreements made under law will remain operative until altered through law. You may ask whether the threat itself, even if unfulfilled, carries constitutional significance. It does. Markets respond to signals. State officials recalibrate expectations. International partners reassess risk. The mere suggestion that executive power may be exercised unpredictably in the infrastructure context introduces instability into domains that require steadiness. The rule of law depends not only upon outcomes, but upon the assurance that lawful processes govern decision-making. At bottom, this controversy tests whether we still understand the distinction between power and authority. Power is the capacity to act. Authority is the lawful entitlement to do so. Our Constitution was written to ensure that authority, not mere capacity, governs the conduct of those who hold office. When that distinction blurs, the safeguards of Republican government weaken, even if no immediate crisis materializes. There is another dimension to this controversy that warrants sober attention. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is not merely a line on a map. It is one of the most economically integrated border regions in the world. Modern manufacturing, particularly in the automotive sector, does not proceed in isolated national compartments. Components cross the border multiple times before a finished product reaches consumers. Engines, transmissions, electronic systems, and structural assemblies move back and forth in a choreography of precision that depends upon timing measured not in weeks, but in hours. When infrastructure is uncertain, production schedules falter. When production falters, economic consequences ripple outward to workers, suppliers, and communities on both sides of the border. The constitutional relevance of these facts lies in the principle of reliance. When government authorizes a major infrastructure project and private actors organize their economic lives around that authorization, the government assumes a heightened obligation of stability. This is not merely a matter of prudence. It reflects a core feature of the rule of law, that citizens and states alike may structure their conduct based on publicly declared legal commitments. If those commitments can be withdrawn without statutory process, the predictability that undergirds commerce is diminished. In our constitutional system, Congress possesses the authority to regulate foreign commerce. It may alter tariffs. It may condition entry of goods. It may revise statutory frameworks governing cross-border activity. The President participates in that sphere through delegated authority and negotiation. But when a project has been authorized under existing law, funded pursuant to agreement, and permitted through established executive procedures, the power to undo it does not arise from dissatisfaction with unrelated trade disputes. It would require lawful grounds rooted in statute, treaty, or national emergency recognized by law. We must also consider the structural implications for executive precedent. If one administration may threaten to halt a bridge on grounds untethered to the permitting statute or the agreement that authorized it, what principle limits the next administration from revisiting other lawfully approved projects for reasons equally external to their original authorization? Pipelines, ports, energy grids, digital infrastructure, each could become subject to episodic political recalibration. The long-term effect would not be flexibility, it would be fragility. The framers did not design a system in which executive power floats free of legislative architecture. They designed one in which each branch operates within defined competencies. The President negotiates, executes, and represents the nation abroad. Congress legislates, appropriates, and regulates commerce. States manage local interests within the bounds of federal supremacy. When those roles are respected, the system functions with resilience. When one branch attempts to retroactively reconfigure a settled arrangement without engaging the others, the equilibrium strains.